We have professional mechanics for that, ma'am. Flight attendant Tiffany Baker said, cutting the black woman off with a dismissive wave. The plane is perfectly safe. She saw a passenger offering an unsolicited opinion, not Dr. Jasmine Wright, a decorated former Air Force combat pilot with a PhD in aerospace engineering, trying to warn her about a potential compressor issue on the Boeing 787's left engine. Tiffany rolled her eyes, confident in her assessment. She couldn't know that Jasmine had over 5,000 flight hours, or that the co-pilot sitting in the cockpit was Jasmine's former wingman from a classified mission. As the flight crew continued to ignore her warnings, they believed they were handling a nervous flyer. In reality, their prejudice was sealing the fate of everyone on board. They were flying into a catastrophic storm with a failing engine, and the only person who knew how to save them was the very woman they refused to listen to. Before we dive into this shocking story, tell me where you're watching from today. If you want more stories about everyday heroes standing up against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe now. Can you believe what happens next when this decorated veteran faces blatant racism at 30,000 FT? Let's find out. Dr. Jasmine Wright checked her watch as she waited in the boarding line for Atlantic Airways Flight 2187 from New York to London. As a decorated former Air Force pilot with 12 successful combat missions under her belt, and now an aerospace engineer for one of the nation's top defense contractors, flying was second nature to her. But something felt off today. The distinctive whine of the left engine caught her attention immediately. After logging over 5,000 flight hours, Jasmine could distinguish between normal operational sounds and potential problems. This particular pitch indicated possible compressor issues as passengers filed onto the Boeing 787. She also noticed subtle irregularities in the cabin pressure system, nothing catastrophic yet, but concerning enough that she made a mental note to alert the crew. Boarding passes, please, said flight attendant Tiffany Baker with a practiced smile that vanished the moment she looked at Jasmine. Her eyes performed the all too familiar flicker of judgment that Jasmine had experienced countless times before. Excuse me, Jasmine said after presenting her boarding pass. I noticed some unusual sounds from the left engine during boarding. It might be worth having maintenance take a quick look before Tiffany cut her off with a dismissive wave. We have professional mechanics for that, ma'am. Please move along. You're holding up the line. Her tone carried the condescending edge Jasmine recognized from people who automatically assumed her incompetence. I understand, but I'm actually a pilot myself. And yes, I'm sure you are. Tiffany replied with an exaggerated eye roll. We get a lot of nervous flyers who suddenly become aviation experts. The plane is perfectly safe, but maybe you prefer the train next time. She turned to the white businessman behind Jasmine. First class is through that door on the right. Mr. Harrison, we've upgraded you today. Jasmine made her way to seat 9C, noting how Tiffany warmly addressed each white passenger while barely acknowledging the black family in front of her. When an elderly white woman expressed concern about the air conditioning, Tiffany immediately adjusted her vent and offered a blanket. But when the black teenager across the aisle made the same request moments later, he received only a curt, "We'll see about that later." As Jasmine settled in, the man beside her extended his hand. Aaron Phillips, freelance journalist, couldn't help overhearing that exchange. Happens a lot when you fly. More than I'd like to admit, Jasmine replied, shaking his hand. Dr. Jasmine Wright. Doctor, what if you don't mind me asking, aerospace engineering with a specialty in avionics systems, before that Air Force pilot? Aaron whistled low. So when you mentioned the engine, you actually knew what you were talking about. 14 years of experience tends to sharpen your ears. The engines roared to life and Jasmine immediately tensed. The left engine's pitch was even more concerning now, accompanied by a subtle vibration that most passengers wouldn't notice. She pressed the call button. Tiffany appeared visibly annoyed. Yes, the vibration pattern in the left engine suggests a possible compressor stall developing. It really should be checked before, ma'am. Tiffany interrupted loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. I've already told you our planes are maintained by qualified professionals. If you continue disrupting the flight with these unfounded concerns, I'll have to report you to the captain. An older white man across the aisle spoke up. I feel the vibration too. Maybe someone should check it. Tiffany's demeanor instantly transformed. I'll mention it to the captain right away, sir. Thank you for bringing that to our attention." As she walked away, Aaron muttered, "Unbelievable. Unfortunately, very believable." Jasmine replied. The plane taxied to the runway and took off. The concerning sounds intensified, but when Jasmine tried once more to alert another flight attendant, she received the same dismissive response. Jasmine closed her eyes, memories flooding back. The Air Force Academy, where instructors questioned her abilities despite perfect test scores. Combat missions where male pilots with half her qualifications second-guessed her commands. Job interviews where recruiters expressed surprise at her credentials given her background. Her thoughts were interrupted when a shadow fell across her seat. A tall man with Kyle Matthews' flight supervisor on his name tag stood in the aisle, Tiffany smirking behind him. Dar right, I understand you're causing some concern among passengers with talk of engine problems," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "I'm not trying to cause concern. I'm trying to prevent a potential issue from becoming a serious problem. We have qualified pilots and engineers who handle these matters." Kyle replied condescendingly, "If you continue disrupting this flight, I'll have no choice but to request air marshal intervention. Do I make myself clear?" Before Jasmine could respond, the plane lurched violently, sending Kyle grabbing for the nearest seat. The first real turbulence of what promised to be a very long flight had arrived, along with the distinctive sound of an engine in distress. 2 hours into the transatlantic journey, Flight 2187 encountered the leading edge of a storm system not fully accounted for in their flight plan. The turbulence intensified from occasional bumps to sustained rough air that had the aircraft bucking and dropping without warning. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and keep your seat belts fastened until further notice." What he didn't announce was what Jasmine could clearly deduce. They were flying with an increasingly problematic engine and deteriorating electrical systems. The cabin lights flickered ominously, and in sections 7 through 12, oxygen masks suddenly deployed, dangling above terrified passengers. "Remain calm, everyone," a male flight attendant called out. "This is just a system error. There's no need to use the oxygen masks at this time." Passengers looked at each other in confusion and growing panic. A child began crying. An anxious murmur spread throughout the cabin. Jasmine unbuckled her seatbelt. "What are you doing?" Aaron asked. "Those masks don't deploy accidentally. Something's wrong with the cabin pressure system. I need to talk to someone who will actually listen." She made her way toward the rear galley where Kyle and Tiffany huddled in urgent conversation. Their worried expressions confirmed Jasmine's suspicions. "Excuse me," Jasmine said. "The random oxygen mask deployment suggests a pressure control system failure, possibly related to the electrical issues. I can help diagnose. Return to your seat immediately." Kyle snapped. "This is a crew-only area during turbulence. People could be in danger. I have specialized knowledge that's security." Kyle called out, looking past her. "We have an uncooperative passenger." As if on cue, a burly air marshal approached. "Ma'am, return to your seat now." Jasmine noticed his hand resting near his concealed weapon. "You're making a mistake. I'm trying to help. The only help we need is passengers following instructions," Tiffany added with unmistakable satisfaction. As Jasmine reluctantly returned to her seat, she noticed Aaron had his phone out, discreetly recording the interaction. Documenting patterns, he whispered, "Professional habit." Midway back to her seat, Jasmine heard labored breathing from row 14. An elderly black man clutched his chest while a flight attendant walked past without acknowledging his distress. Jasmine immediately knelt beside him. "Sir, are you all right?" "My pills," he gasped. "And overhead, can't reach." "I'll get them." "What's your name?" "Samuel Johnson, 20 years Air Force." "I'm Jasmine Wright, Air Force 2. "Hang in there, Samuel." She quickly located his medication in the overhead bin and helped him take a pill. Using her military medical training, she checked his pulse and respiratory rate. "Thank you, daughter," Samuel said as his breathing gradually normalized. Asked that attendant twice, she just kept walking. Jasmine stayed with Samuel until his condition stabilized. By then, several passengers had noticed the incident, including a white woman in the next row who loudly demanded, "Why wasn't anyone helping this man? He was clearly in distress." Some passengers seemed to be invisible to certain crew members. Barron remarked, having moved to document the situation. As Jasmine finally returned to her seat, she overheard Tiffany and another flight attendant in the galley. "Those problem passengers in row 9 need to be watched," Tiffany muttered, "especially that one who thinks she knows about planes." Just another entitled. She used a racial slur that made Jasmine freeze in her tracks. The other attendant looked uncomfortable but didn't contradict her colleague. Before Jasmine could confront them, the aircraft suddenly dropped several hundred FT without warning. Unrestrained passengers and items flew toward the ceiling before crashing back down. Screams filled the cabin as oxygen masks deployed throughout the entire aircraft. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, noticeably strained. "This is Captain Thomas. We're experiencing some technical difficulties that require us to descend to a lower altitude. Please remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened and use the oxygen masks as demonstrated during the safety briefing." Jasmine recognized the controlled panic in his voice. An experienced pilot only sounded that way when things were far worse than he was admitting. The left engine's pitch had changed again, not improving, but faltering. And now there was a new problem. The distinctive smell of electrical components overheating. Flight 2187 was in serious trouble, and the people in charge were ignoring the one person who might be able to help. The situation deteriorated rapidly over the next 20 minutes. The cabin lights no longer merely flickered, but switched completely to emergency lighting. The entertainment systems went dark. Most concerning to Jasmine, the distinctive hum of normal electrical systems had given way to an ominous silence, punctuated by the increasingly labored sound of the troubled engine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kyle announced, his voice betraying tension despite his attempt at composure, "we're experiencing some electrical system issues that our pilots are addressing. As a precautionary measure, we're asking if there are any passengers with aviation experience who could assist the crew." Jasmine immediately raised her hand, as did a middle-aged white man several rows ahead. Kyle approached the white passenger first. "Sir, your experience. I have a private pilot's license, single-engine Cessnas, mostly about 200 hours total." "Perfect. Please come with me." When Kyle passed Jasmine without acknowledgement, she stood up. "Excuse me. I'm a former Air Force pilot with combat experience and an aerospace engineering doctorate. I specifically understand the systems on this aircraft model." Kyle and Tiffany exchanged glances. "We've already found assistance." "Thank you," Tiffany said dismissively. "Are you serious?" Aaron interjected. "You're ignoring the most qualified person on this plane. Because of what exactly?" "Sir, this is none of your concern," Kyle snapped. "Actually, as someone who might die if this plane goes down, it very much is my concern." Aaron replied, continuing to record. The recreational pilot, to his credit, spoke up. "I only fly small single engines." "If she has commercial or military experience, she's far more qualified." "We've made our decision," Kyle insisted, leading the man toward the cockpit. Jasmine watched them go, her mind racing through possible system failures and solutions. Without access to the cockpit, she decided to focus on what she could control, helping maintain order in the cabin and assisting any passengers in distress. She organized nearby passengers to secure loose items and helped an elderly couple properly with their oxygen masks. Word of her qualifications spread through the cabin, and passengers began looking to her rather than the flight attendants for guidance. Aaron continued documenting everything, occasionally live streaming when the spotty Wi-Fi permitted. "People should see this," he muttered. "It's not just unprofessional, it's endangering lives." Samuel made his way carefully from his seat to join them in row 9. "Thought I might be more use here, Captain," he said to Jasmine. "I'm not a captain anymore, Mr. Johnson. Once a captain, always a captain. And it's Master Sergeant Johnson, retired." He lowered his voice. "Reminds me of 67 in Dawn. White commander wouldn't listen to our units intel. Lost 17 men proving us right." "Some things never change," Jasmine replied grimly. "Some things do," Samuel countered. "Back then, I couldn't do anything but watch. Today, we've got options." A violent shudder ran through the aircraft, followed by a complete electrical blackout. When emergency systems resumed seconds later, Jasmine noted the air conditioning had stopped. Even more alarming, she could tell from subtle shifts in engine noise and aircraft motion that they had veered significantly off course. After checking her navigation app, Her suspicions were confirmed. They were no longer heading toward London, but were drifting northwest. Directly ahead lay one of the most dangerous storm systems she tracked during her pre-flight weather review. The recreational pilot returned looking shaken. They're having major issues up there. Multiple system failures. The pilots asked me about small aircraft emergency procedures, but nothing applicable to the situation. Did you tell them about Dr. Wright? Aaron asked. I tried. The supervisor shut me down. Jasmine's patience reached its limit. This is absurd. They're putting everyone at risk because they won't accept help from a black woman. She stood up, determined to reach the cockpit, but at that moment the aircraft entered the storm system's outer bands. Violent turbulence threw her against a seat. Lightning flashed outside the windows, momentarily blinding passengers. The left engine made a sound Jasmine recognized all too well from her combat days. The distinctive whine of compressor blades beginning to fail. Flight 2187 was flying into a perfect storm, both literally and figuratively, with catastrophe becoming more likely by the minute. The violent turbulence intensified as Flight 2187 penetrated deeper into the storm system. Rain lashed against the windows with such force it sounded like gravel hitting the fuselage. Lightning strikes illuminated the cabin in strobing flashes, revealing terrified faces and praying passengers. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, barely audible over the storm. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Thomas. We're experiencing severe weather conditions along with some technical difficulties. We're diverting to make an emergency water landing. Flight attendants prepare the cabin. A collective gasp swept through the aircraft, followed by cries and sobs. The phrase water landing triggered everyone's worst fears. They all knew what it really meant. Tiffany, who had been so composed when dismissing Jasmine's concerns, now stood frozen in the aisle, her face ashen. The emergency procedure manual slipped from her trembling hands. "I can't do this," she whispered as another flight attendant tried to guide her through the preparations. "We're going to die. We're all going to die." The recreational pilot, who'd been briefly consulted, returned to his seat, buckling in with a grim expression. "It's bad," he told nearby passengers, "really bad." Aaron continued recording, his journalist instincts overriding his fear. "The crew is ignoring the most qualified person on this flight," he narrated quietly. Dr. Jasmine Wright, former Air Force pilot and aerospace engineer, has been trying to help since before takeoff. Jasmine was busy organizing passengers in her section, demonstrating proper brace positions, and helping secure children. When she spotted Kyle stumbling down the aisle, she intercepted him. "The left engine is failing, and we're heading into the worst part of the storm system." She said urgently, "I need to speak with the pilots." Kyle's fear had apparently transformed into anger. He spat. "You've been undermining crew authority since we took off. Are you happy now that you've scared everyone? This isn't about me." Jasmine insisted. "This is about survival. I have specific training for this exact situation." "You've done enough damage," Kyle hissed, lowering his voice but unable to hide his contempt. "Your kind always thinks they know better than everyone else. Now get back to your seat before I have you restrained." Aaron captured the entire exchange. "Say that again." He challenged Kyle. "Her kind. What exactly do you mean by that?" Kyle realized too late that he was being recorded. "I meant passengers who don't respect crew authority." He backpedaled unconvincingly. "That's not what you meant." Called out a white woman from row 7 who had overheard. "I've been watching how you and that other attendant have treated Dr. Wright and other black passengers. It's disgraceful." Multiple passengers voiced their agreement, creating a chorus of disapproval that momentarily drowned out the storm's fury. "While you've been profiling passengers, this aircraft has been deteriorating." Jasmine said, "That noise you hear, that's a compressor stall developing. We have minutes, not hours, to address it." Jasmine pushed past Kyle toward the front of the aircraft, where a young flight attendant named Maria stood nervously by the cockpit door. "Maria Wright?" Jasmine asked, reading her name tag. "I need to speak with the pilots immediately." "It's life or death." I can't let anyone in without supervisor authorization," Maria replied, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. "Then get on that interphone and tell them Dr. Jasmine Wright, call sign Phoenix, needs to speak with them about preventing a compressor stall and total electrical failure." Something in Jasmine's tone must have convinced her. Maria picked up the interphone and relayed the message. Behind them, Samuel suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed into his seat. The stress had triggered another cardiac event more severe than the first. "He needs medical attention now," Aaron shouted, but in the chaos, no one responded. The aircraft lurched violently to one side as the left engine finally gave out completely. Oxygen masks dropped again as the cabin rapidly depressurized. The terrifying whistle of air escaping through compromised seals added to the cacophony of alarms and human panic. In this moment of ultimate crisis, as Flight 2187 began its uncontrolled descent toward the Atlantic, the cockpit door suddenly opened. Have you ever experienced discrimination that put lives at risk? Comment number 1 if you think Kyle and Tiffany should be fired immediately for endangering these passengers. Type number 2 if you believe the airline is ultimately responsible for allowing such toxic employees. Hit that like button if you're rooting for Dr. A right to save the day against all odds, and subscribe to hear more stories about everyday heroes fighting against prejudice. How would you react if you were Aaron, witnessing this discrimination firsthand while plummeting toward the ocean? And what do you think happened when that cockpit door finally opened? Let's find out. First Officer Paul Martinez appeared in the cockpit doorway, his face registering shock when he saw Jasmine Phoenix. He exclaimed, using a call sign Jasmine hadn't heard in years, "Sidewinder." Jasmine replied, automatically recognizing her former wingman from Operation Desert Shield, despite the 7 years that had passed. "You two know each other?" Maria asked, confusion momentarily overriding her panic. Paul grabbed Jasmine's arm. "Captain needs you now." To Maria, he ordered, "Get the medical kit to the passenger in cardiac distress." As Jasmine entered the cockpit, Captain William Thomas barely glanced up from his frantic efforts to stabilize the aircraft with one functioning engine. "Whoever you are, strap in and stay quiet. We're fighting for our lives here." "She's Phoenix," Paul said urgently, "from the 33rd. The captain's hands froze momentarily on the controls. "The Phoenix Kandahar 2017. The same," Paul confirmed. The cockpit instruments told the story. Multiple system failures, one dead engine, electrical systems failing sequentially, and fuel levels dropping too rapidly due to a potential leak. The storm outside showed on radar as a massive red blob directly in their path. "Captain, I'm Dr. Jasmine Wright, aerospace engineer specializing in the electrical and fuel systems on this exact aircraft model," she said, cutting through the introductions. "What you're experiencing isn't just storm damage or mechanical failure. The pattern suggests a possible cyber intrusion in the aircraft's control systems." "That's impossible," Captain Thomas argued. "These systems are isolated." "Not entirely," Jasmine interrupted. "I led the team that identified vulnerabilities in the integrated avionics, exactly like what we're seeing. There's a specific protocol to reset the systems without losing critical functions." "How do I know I can trust you?" Thomas demanded, even as alarms blared around them. Paul spoke up. "Sir, this woman saved an entire squadron when our systems were compromised over hostile territory. 33 lives. I was there." A series of images flashed through Jasmine's mind. The classified mission gone wrong. Enemy forces using experimental electronic warfare. Her unconventional solution that violated every protocol but saved every pilot. Before the captain could respond, the aircraft dropped several hundred feet without warning. He fought the controls as Paul worked to restart the failed engine. "We don't have time to debate this," Jasmine insisted. "The procedure requires physical access to the main electronics bay and simultaneous inputs from the cockpit." Captain Thomas made his decision. "Martinez, take the controls. I'll coordinate from here. Dr. Wright, tell me what you need." Outside in the main cabin, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Aaron had taken charge of helping Samuel while several passengers with medical backgrounds monitored his condition. Kyle was nowhere to be seen, but Tiffany had apparently recovered from her panic and was now attempting to assert control. "Everyone must remain seated," she shouted, moving toward the growing crowd around Samuel. "This man is dying while you're worried about seat assignments." Aaron shot back. "Where's the medical kit?" Maria appeared with the kit just as Tiffany tried to intercept her. "Step aside," Maria said with newfound authority. "Captain's orders." Back in the cockpit, Jasmine outlined her plan. "The cyber intrusion is targeting the integrated systems through the maintenance access port. We need to physically disconnect it and perform a partial system reset while maintaining manual control of essential functions. That's never been done in flight, Captain Thomas objected. I've simulated it dozens of times, Jasmine assured him. It's our only option besides ditching in the Atlantic during a Category 4 storm. As they worked through the procedure, the aircraft's satellite phone rang. Captain Thomas answered to find Atlantic Airways Executive Crisis Team on the line. We're seeing reports on social media about discrimination incidents on your flight. A tense voice stated, "Is the situation under control? We're fighting to keep this aircraft from breaking apart, and you're calling about social media." Thomas exploded. "Get me technical support for a full avionics reset now." While the executive scrambled to respond, Jasmine continued her work, directing Paul through a series of precise steps to isolate critical systems. "The electronics bay access requires crew authorization," she explained. "I need to get down there myself." Captain Thomas hesitated only briefly before handing her his access card. "Do whatever it takes." As Jasmine exited the cockpit, she found Kyle blocking her path. "Where do you think you're going?" "No passengers allowed in restricted areas. Captain's direct order," Jasmine replied, showing the access card. "Move aside. I don't care what the captain said. I'm the cabin supervisor." And I say Aaron appeared with his phone still recording. And I say, "The world is watching you endanger everyone on this flight with your prejudice." Kyle's face contorted with rage. "You people always stick together, don't you? Fine, go ahead and break protocol. When we crash, everyone will know who's responsible." As Jasmine pushed past him toward the electronics bay access panel, she heard a commotion behind her. A diverse group of passengers had surrounded Kyle, their faces unified in anger and determination. "The only person endangering us is you," said a white businessman in a suit. "We've all seen how you've treated Dr. Wright and other black passengers. You're done," added an elderly white woman. "When we land, if we land, your career is over." Jasmine had no time to witness Kyle's response. She reached the access panel beneath the galley floor and descended into the heart of the aircraft systems. What she found confirmed her worst fears: critical connections overheated, backup systems failing, and the distinctive pattern of system corruption she had documented in her classified research. The repair would require all her knowledge of both military and commercial aircraft systems, perfect timing with the cockpit team, and physical dexterity in a space never meant for in-flight access, and she would have to do it all as the aircraft battled through the worst storm system of the North Atlantic season. The electronics bay was a cramped space filled with the aircraft's nervous system bundles of color-coded wires, circuit boards, and control modules arranged in meticulous order. Under normal circumstances, technicians would only access this area when the plane was safely on the ground. Now, as Flight 2187 bucked and shuddered through the storm, Jasmine braced herself against the metal framework, flashlight clenched between her teeth. "I'm in position," she spoke into the headset Captain Thomas had given her. "Beginning diagnostic sequence, copy that," Thomas replied from the cockpit. "Fuel situation critical. We have approximately 22 minutes before we need to attempt a water landing. 22 minutes to save over 300 lives. Jasmine pushed aside the pressure and focused on the task at hand. The pattern of failures matched what she had documented in her research: a cascading shutdown triggered by a vulnerability in the aircraft's integrated systems. The solution required physically disconnecting compromised components while maintaining critical functions through manual overrides, a procedure that would normally require a team of specialized engineers. "I need to create a bypass for the main electrical bus," she explained to the cockpit. "It will cause momentary system interruptions." "Understood," Captain Thomas confirmed. "We're ready." Jasmine carefully extracted the primary control module, her fingers working with precision despite the aircraft's violent movements. Each wire disconnection had to be performed in exact sequence. One mistake could shut down the remaining engine or disable flight controls completely. Above in the main cabin, Aaron continued documenting the unfolding drama while helping coordinate passenger safety. The diverse group of passengers who had confronted Kyle had formed an impromptu crisis team, with those having medical or military backgrounds taking leadership roles. Samuel, now stabilized but still in danger, had become a rallying point. In Vietnam, he told those gathered around him they wouldn't let black soldiers lead until they had no choice. Then suddenly, we were good enough to die first. Atlantic Airways executives were in full crisis mode on the ground. Videos of Kyle and Tiffany's discriminatory behavior had gone viral with hashtags like flight racism and black pilot saves trending globally. Their initial response focused on damage control rather than passenger safety. We need that plane on the ground intact. CEO Richard Blackwell barked at his team, "I don't care how they do it, but make it happen. The PR nightmare is already catastrophic." Back in the electronics bay, Jasmine encountered a critical obstacle. The bypass required a specific connector that was damaged beyond repair. "I need to improvise a junction coupling," she informed Captain Thomas. "It's not in any manual, but I've done it in simulation." "What are the risks?" Thomas asked. 30% chance it overloads the secondary systems, 70% chance it works long enough to get us to an airport, and if we do nothing, 100% chance we lose all power within 10 minutes. "Do it," Thomas ordered. As Jasmine worked to create the improvised connector, the cockpit door burst open. Kyle had somehow obtained an access key and forced his way in. "Captain, you need to relieve Dr. Wright immediately," he demanded. "She's compromising aircraft safety protocols and inciting passenger unrest." Captain Thomas didn't even look up from his instruments. "Mr. Matthews, return to your station, or I'll have you restrained for interfering with flight operations." "You don't understand," Kyle insisted. "These people are manipulating you there. These people," Paul interrupted from the co-pilot seat, "say what you really mean." "I mean unauthorized passengers tampering with aircraft systems," Kyle shouted. "When we crash, it'll be on your head. The only reason we haven't crashed already is because of Dr. Wright," Captain Thomas stated flatly. "Now get out of my cockpit before I have you placed under arrest." Kyle retreated, but the damage to communication had been done. Vital seconds had been lost as the storm intensified around them. In the electronics bay, Jasmine completed the improvised connector using components from non-essential systems. It was a masterpiece of engineering ingenuity, ugly but functional, exactly like the battlefield repairs she performed under enemy fire years ago. "Bypass ready," she reported. "On your command. I'll initiate the reset sequence. Stand by," Captain Thomas replied. "We need to coordinate with air traffic control for emergency landing options. Shannon, Ireland is our best bet if this works." Jasmine waited, sweat beading on her forehead, despite the increasingly cold cabin temperature. The oxygen level was dropping as environmental systems faltered. Every minute reduced their chances of survival. In the cabin, Aaron had gathered several passengers to prepare for Jasmine's return. "When Dr. Wright comes up, she'll need immediate assistance," he explained. "The reset will likely cause temporary system failures throughout the aircraft." "What can we do to help?" asked a young woman who had identified herself as a mechanical engineer. "Secure anything loose, prepare for possible sudden maneuvers, and keep everyone calm," Aaron instructed. "And if certain crew members try to interfere," he glanced meaningfully toward Kyle, who was arguing with Maria near the galley, "delay them by any means necessary." Shannon Air Traffic Control received Flight 2187's emergency notification with grave concern. "Atlantic 2187, we understand you're attempting an unprecedented system reset during flight. We have emergency services standing by, but be advised, weather conditions at Shannon are deteriorating rapidly." "Copy that, Shannon," Captain Thomas responded. "We're out of alternatives." He switched to the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Thomas. We're about to attempt an emergency procedure to restore aircraft systems. There will be momentary power interruptions and possible sudden movements. Brace yourselves according to the safety demonstrations and follow crew instructions. Then to Jasmine, Dr. Wright, you're clear to proceed. God help us all." Jasmine took a deep breath and began the reset sequence, a precisely timed series of connections and disconnections that would either save them or send them plummeting into the Atlantic. The procedure required perfect coordination between her actions in the electronics bay and the pilot's inputs in the cockpit. At the critical moment, as Jasmine prepared to execute the final step, the aircraft hit a violent air pocket that slammed her against the equipment rack. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she maintained her grip on the crucial components. Now she called out, completing the connection despite the injury. The entire aircraft went dark. All systems, communications lights, environmental controls, even the cockpit displays shut down completely. For 3 terrifying seconds, Flight 2187 was nothing more than a metal tube falling through storm clouds with only basic aerodynamic principles keeping it aloft. Then one by one, systems began to reactivate. First, the essential flight controls, then backup power. Finally, the right engine stabilized at optimal performance. "It's working," Paul exclaimed as the cockpit displays flickered back to life. But their celebration was premature. The left engine remained dead. Multiple secondary systems were still offline, and they were flying on minimal power through one of the worst storms in recent Atlantic history. And somewhere in the darkness of the aircraft, Kyle was making one final desperate attempt to reassert his authority, a decision that would push an already precarious situation to its absolute breaking point. The partial systems recovery gave Flight 21-87 a fighting chance, but they were far from safe. Flying on a single engine through severe turbulence, Captain Thomas struggled to maintain altitude while Paul coordinated with Shannon Airport for emergency landing clearance. Jasmine climbed back from the electronics bay, her shoulder throbbing from the impact. The cabin was dimly lit by emergency lighting, oxygen masks still dangling, and terrified passengers clinging to armrests as the aircraft continued its violent ride through the storm. "Dr. Wright," Aaron called out, making his way toward her. "The bypass worked partially." Jasmine replied, grimacing through the pain. "We've restored essential systems and stabilized the remaining engine, but we're still in critical condition." A sudden bout of turbulence sent them both crashing into nearby seats. The storm was intensifying, with hail now pounding the fuselage like gunfire. "Captain needs you in the cockpit immediately," Maria informed Jasmine, appearing beside them. "He says it's urgent." As Jasmine made her way forward, she noticed Tiffany quietly attending to passengers, her earlier hostility replaced by subdued efficiency. The transformation came too late to erase her previous behavior, but at least she was no longer actively obstructing efforts to save the flight. Jasmine found Captain Thomas slumped in his seat, his face pale and sweating profusely. Paul was handling the controls while a flight attendant administered oxygen. "Suspected heart attack," Paul explained grimly. "Started right after the systems reset." "I can still fly," Thomas insisted weakly, but his ashen complexion told a different story. "With respect, sir, you need medical attention," Jasmine said. "First Officer Martinez is fully capable. The landing approach to Shannon requires 2 qualified pilots under these conditions," Thomas argued. Regulations won't matter if we don't survive," Paul countered. "Dr. Wright has the qualifications. It's against company policy to allow a passenger." "I'm invoking Emergency Protocol Alpha 7. Paul interrupted, referencing the aviation regulation that permitted qualified individuals to assist flight crew during life-threatening emergencies. "Dr. Wright, take the co-pilot position." Thomas didn't protest further as the flight attendant helped him to the main cabin for medical attention. Jasmine slipped into the co-pilot seat, quickly familiarizing herself with the layout, which differed slightly from military aircraft. "Shannon approach has cleared us for emergency landing on runway 06, Paul informed her. "Weather conditions rapidly deteriorating visibility under a 4-mile crosswinds at 32 knots, gusting to 45. We'll need to perform a modified crosswind approach with single-engine compensation." Jasmine analyzed, already calculating the necessary adjustments. "Exactly what I was thinking," Paul agreed. "Let's synchronize on the procedure." As they worked through the emergency landing protocols, the satellite phone rang again. Paul answered to find air traffic control with disturbing news. "Atlantic 2187. Be advised, we're showing potential security breach aboard your aircraft. Unauthorized access to cargo hold detected." Paul and Jasmine exchanged alarmed glances. Confirming unauthorized access, Paul responded, "Stand by." He switched to the cabin intercom. "This is First Officer Martinez. Security team to the rear galley immediately. Possible breach in cargo area." Aaron, who had been helping with Samuel's ongoing care, immediately suspected Kyle's involvement. The flight supervisor had disappeared shortly after his confrontation in the cockpit. "I'll check it out," Aaron told the assembled passengers. "The rest of you prepare for emergency landing. We're going to make it through this." In the cockpit, Jasmine and Paul faced a new crisis as Shannon Air Traffic Control reported weather conditions worsening by the minute. Atlantic 2187. All other traffic diverted. Weather dropping below minimums for standard approach. "Can you attempt instrument landing?" "Negative, Shannon," Paul responded. "We're operating on limited instrumentation with single-engine power." Jasmine studied the navigation display, noting their position relative to the Irish coast. "We need to try the military approach." She suggested the ravine run. Paul asked, recognizing the reference to a classified special operations technique that's never been attempted with a commercial aircraft. "It's our best option given the crosswinds and limited power," Jasmine insisted. "We use the terrain masking to shield from the worst wind shear, then make final approach from the southwest instead of the standard eastern corridor. That would require visual flight rules and zero visibility conditions," Paul pointed out. "Not if we use the terrain following system. I just bypass through the auxiliary radar," Jasmine countered, already programming the necessary parameters. It was a desperate gamble, a modified version of a classified military approach using a damaged commercial aircraft with hundreds of civilian lives at stake. But with Shannon's weather deteriorating and fuel levels critical, conventional options had evaporated. Meanwhile, Aaron had reached the rear galley where Maria stood guard at the cargo access hatch. "Kyle went down there about 5 minutes ago," she explained. "Said it was on captain's orders to check for fire risk. I tried to confirm with the cockpit, but communications were down. We need to get him out of there," Aaron said urgently. "Whatever he's doing could jeopardize the landing." Before they could act, the aircraft lurched violently as the remaining engine momentarily lost power. In the cockpit, alarms blared as fuel pressure fluctuated. "We've got a new problem," Paul announced, fighting the controls. "Fuel line tampering. Someone's interfering with the crossfeed valves." Kyle, Jasmine, and Aaron said simultaneously, though in different parts of the aircraft. Aaron pried open the cargo access hatch to find Kyle frantically manipulating control panels in the rear equipment bay. "Stop," Aaron shouted. "You're going to kill us all. I'm fixing what she broke." Kyle screamed back, his face contorted with rage and fear. "These people don't know what they're doing." Aaron lunged forward, tackling Kyle away from the equipment. They grappled in a confined space as the aircraft continued its violent approach toward the Irish coast. In the cockpit, Jasmine rerouted fuel systems through emergency lines. "We've got maybe 10 minutes of fuel remaining," she informed Paul. Shannon is reporting visibility 0 with severe wind shear on final approach. "Then we do it your way," Paul decided. "The ravine run it is." Jasmine quickly programmed the approach while Paul contacted Shannon. "Atlantic 2187 requesting special approach clearance, military protocol, Sierra Tango 9. There was a long pause before Shannon responded. "Atlantic 2187. "We have no record of that approach procedure. Connect me with Royal Air Force Liaison Officer immediately," Paul requested. Authentication code, Phoenix 33. Moments later, a new voice came over the radio. "Atlantic 2187, this is Squadron Leader Hamilton, RAF. Confirm you're attempting the Kintail approach." "Affirmative," Paul replied. "Former Air Force Captain Jasmine right aboard as acting co-pilot. Call sign Phoenix, the Phoenix." Hamilton sounded surprised. "Understood. Approach approved. Godspeed." As they began the unconventional approach using terrain features to shield from the worst crosswinds, Aaron and several passengers had successfully restrained Kyle in the main cabin. He was trying to override the fuel management system. Aaron reported to the cockpit via intercom, says he was trying to correct Dr. Wright's modifications, more likely trying to sabotage them. Jasmine replied grimly, "Secure him and prepare for extremely rough landing." The coast of Ireland appeared through breaks in the storm clouds, rugged cliffs, and narrow inlets that would guide their approach. The ravine run utilized these natural features as a windbreak, allowing aircraft to approach below the worst turbulence. Beginning final approach, Paul announced to the cabin, "Brace for landing in 3 minutes." As they descended through the narrow approach corridor, the remaining engines suddenly sputtered and went silent. The fuel tanks were empty. Loss of power. Paul reported, maintaining remarkable composure. Switching to controlled glide, Jasmine responded equally calm. As they transitioned to a powerless descent, Shannon Tower watched in disbelief as Flight 2187 appeared on their radar, descending without power through a corridor never intended for commercial aircraft, somehow maintaining a controlled approach path despite hurricane-force winds. "They're attempting a dead stick landing," the controller announced to the emergency crews standing by. "Full response teams to positions now. In the final moments of flight, as the rugged Irish coastline gave way to the Shannon Airport perimeter, Jasmine and Paul worked in perfect synchronization, adjusting flaps, managing airspeed, calculating the precise angle of descent without power. Atlantic 2187, this is Shannon Tower, runway clear, wind shear alerts active. You are cleared to land. Copy that, Paul acknowledged. Final approach, no power. Controlled descent. The passengers braced as instructed, many praying, some recording final messages to loved ones. Samuel, still weak from his cardiac episodes, whispered encouragement to those around him. We've made it this far. We'll make it home. The ground rushed up to meet them as Jasmine called out altitudes. 1500, 300. Prepare for touchdown. With a skill born from thousands of hours of training and combat experience, Paul and Jasmine guided the powerless aircraft onto the rain-sicked runway. The landing gear hit hard but held. Without engine reverse thrust, they relied entirely on spoilers and brakes to slow the massive aircraft as it hydroplaned down the runway. We're too fast, Paul warned as the end of the runway approached. Emergency arrests engaged. Jasmine confirmed activating the final braking systems. The aircraft shuddered violently, throwing unsecured items forward as it decelerated. For a heart-topping moment, it seemed they would overrun the runway into the grass safety area beyond. Then, with less than 100 FT to spare, Flight 2187 finally came to rest, battered damaged systems failing, but intact. Atlantic 2187 confirmed status. Shannon Tower requested. Paul looked at Jasmine. Both of them exhausted, but alive. Atlantic 2187 on the ground. He reported requesting immediate medical and emergency evacuation support. As sirens wailed across the airfield and emergency vehicles converged on the aircraft, the cabin erupted in cheers, sobs, and prayers of thanksgiving. The nightmare flight was over, but for Kyle, Tiffany, and Atlantic Airways, the consequences were just beginning. 1 month after the near-catastrophic landing of Flight 2187, the gleaming headquarters of Atlantic Airways in New York City became the focal point of international attention. Inside a packed conference room, the airline's board of directors faced the consequences of decisions made long before that fateful flight. Jasmine Wright sat calmly at the witness table, her testimony before the Federal Aviation Administration Special Investigative Panel drawing to a close. Her shoulder had healed, but the memories remained vivid. In conclusion, she stated firmly, the technical failures aboard Flight 2187 were exacerbated by a culture of discrimination that prevented qualified assistance and endangered hundreds of lives. This wasn't an isolated incident, but the predictable outcome of systemic issues within Atlantic Airways' operational structure. The panel chairs, a veteran aviation safety expert, nodded gravely. Thank you, Dr. Wright. Your testimony aligns with our technical findings and the statements of over 200 passengers and crew members. Across the room, Kyle Matthews and his attorney sat stone-faced. He had been terminated immediately after landing arrested by Irish authorities for reckless endangerment and now faced multiple criminal charges in 3 countries. Beside him, Tiffany Baker looked downcast, her own termination and pending civil litigation weighing heavily. CEO Richard Blackwell had tendered his resignation the previous week after internal communications revealed he had personally dismissed multiple discrimination complaints against both Kyle and Tiffany in the past, citing their excellent operational records while ignoring their documented pattern of biased behavior. Aaron Phillips, whose documentary 30,000 FT of Prejudice had already won critical acclaim at an emergency screening at the Becca Film Festival, sat in the front row taking notes. His footage had become central evidence in both the FAA investigation and the class action lawsuit representing passengers from Flight 2187. The board will now hear from Master Sergeant Samuel Johnson, the panel chair announced. Samuel, now fully recovered thanks to proper medical treatment, approached the witness table with dignity that belied his 82 years. I've seen this pattern my entire life. He began, his voice strong despite his age. In Vietnam, they wouldn't let black soldiers lead until white officers were killed. On Flight 2187, they wouldn't listen to Dr. Wright until the plane was literally falling from the sky. The only difference is that this time we have it all on video. The hearing continued with technical experts confirming Jasmine's assessment. The initial engine issues have been detectable and addressable before takeoff. The electrical system failures could have been mitigated hours earlier if her expertise had been accepted. Kyle's interference with the fuel systems during the emergency had nearly caused a catastrophic failure minutes before landing. In the 2 weeks following the emergency landing, Atlantic Airways had faced unprecedented scrutiny. Internal whistleblowers came forward with years of documented discrimination complaints that had been systematically buried by management. Flight attendants of color shared stories of being assigned less desirable routes and passed over for promotion despite superior qualifications. The financial consequences were immediate and severe. Atlantic Airways stock had plummeted 62%. Major corporate clients had canceled contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The airline's one sterling safety rating had been downgraded, pending complete operational review. But most damaging was the complete erosion of public trust, with bookings down nearly 80%, despite desperate fare reductions and promotional campaigns. After the hearing concluded, reporters surrounded Jasmine, Aaron, and Samuel outside FAA headquarters. "Dr. Wright, will you accept Atlantic Airways settlement offer?" one journalist called out. "No amount of money addresses the underlying issue," Jasmine replied. "My conditions remain the same. Complete restructuring of their hiring and training protocols, independent oversight of discrimination complaints, and industry-wide implementation of the safety procedures that saved Flight 2187. Another reporter approached Samuel. "Sir, you've become something of a symbol for elder passengers facing discrimination. What's your message to airlines?" Samuel considered the question carefully. "Respect isn't optional. It's not customer service, it's human decency. And sometimes, as we saw on that flight, it's the difference between life and death." The media attention had transformed all three into reluctant celebrities. Jasmine had received job offers from major aircraft manufacturers and airlines committed to diversifying their engineering teams. Aaron's documentary had been acquired by a major streaming platform. Samuel had been invited to speak at congressional hearings on transportation equity and elder rights. First Officer Paul Martinez joined them outside, having just completed his own testimony. They were implementing the Phoenix approach into emergency landing procedures. He informed Jasmine with a grin. "Your crazy idea is now official aviation protocol." "Not bad for someone Kyle claimed didn't understand commercial aircraft," Jasmine replied. 6 months after the emergency landing, the changes rippled throughout the aviation industry. The FAA had implemented new regulations requiring airlines to document and address all passenger safety concerns regardless of source. Anti-bias training became mandatory for all flight crews with regular assessment and accountability measures. Atlantic Airways, emerging from Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection under entirely new leadership, had become an unlikely model for corporate transformation. Their new CEO, a respected aviation safety expert with a background in civil rights law, had overseen a complete restructuring with diversity and safety as core principles rather than marketing slogans. Tiffany Baker, after losing her job and facing public condemnation, had experienced what she described as a painful awakening. She now worked with an anti-discrimination organization, sharing her story as a cautionary tale about how bias can lead to life-threatening consequences. Kyle Matthews had been convicted on multiple counts of reckless endangerment and interference with flight operations. His 6-year prison sentence was upheld on appeal, with the judge citing his willful disregard for human life motivated by discriminatory bias. On the anniversary of Flight 2187, Jasmine found herself boarding another transatlantic flight, this time as the keynote speaker at an international aviation safety conference in London. As she settled into her seat, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. I'm Captain Mariah Rodriguez. Some of you may recognize my name from Flight 2187 last year. That experience changed aviation forever, and we're honored to have Dr. Jasmine Wright, the engineer, whose expertise saved our lives that day, on board with us." Spontaneous applause erupted throughout the cabin. The flight attendant approaching Jasmine smiled warmly. "Dar Wright, it's a privilege to have you aboard. If you notice anything about our aircraft operations that concerns you, please don't hesitate to let us know immediately." As the aircraft prepared for takeoff, Jasmine gazed out the window at the New York skyline. Her phone buzzed with a message from Aaron. "Documentary just won the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature." Samuel stole the show with his acceptance speech. Another message followed. This one from Samuel himself. Told them the real hero was the black woman no one would listen to. Standing ovation. Wish you were here. Jasmine smiled, thinking about how a single flight had catalyzed overdue changes across an entire industry. The discrimination that had nearly cost hundreds of lives have been exposed, addressed, and transformed into a powerful lesson that continued to save lives every day. The aircraft lifted smoothly into the sky, its engines performing in perfect harmony. This time, everyone was listening. What would you have done if you were on Flight 2187? Would you have stood up like Aaron to document the discrimination, or would you have remained silent? If you believe everyone deserves equal respect, regardless of their race, hit that like button. Now, subscribe to hear more stories about everyday heroes fighting against prejudice and making a difference. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how discrimination can have life-threatening consequences. And don't forget to comment below with your thoughts on how we can all work together to create a more just and equitable world. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most qualified person to save your life might be the one society has taught you to ignore. This story illustrates how discrimination can transform manageable problems into life-threatening disasters. Flight 2187 wasn't doomed by technical failures alone. It was endangered by the crew's refusal to accept help from a qualified black woman. The prejudice displayed by Kyle and Tiffany reveals how bias operates in high-stakes environments where split-second decisions can mean the difference between life and death. We also witnessed the power of documentation and solidarity. Aaron's choice to record the discrimination created accountability, while the passengers who united across racial lines demonstrated how collective action can overcome entrenched prejudice. Samuel's perspective shows how discrimination persists across generations but can be confronted through persistent advocacy. Most importantly, Flight 2187 teaches us that expertise and capability exist in all communities, regardless of race. When organizations value credentials over character and competence over skin color, everyone benefits. Real safety doesn't come from following biased protocols. It comes from recognizing and respecting the contributions of every qualified individual, regardless of their appearance. Have you ever witnessed discrimination that put others at risk? Comment justice if you believe Kyle deserved his punishment or reform, if you think systemic change is more important than individual consequences. Has someone ever dismissed your expertise because of your identity? Share your story below. If this video moved you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe for more powerful stories about overcoming prejudice and standing up for what's right. Share this with someone who needs to understand the real-world consequences of bias. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Flight 287's harrowing experience. Remember that your voice matters in creating a world where everyone's expertise is valued equally. Together we can ensure that life-saving knowledge is never again ignored because of the color of someone's skin.